In the prosperous town of Willowbrook, the Morrison family was known for raising two daughters who couldn't have been more different. Isabella Morrison, the elder at 24, was universally regarded as the town's greatest beauty. With her golden hair that cascaded in perfect waves, emerald eyes that sparkled like jewels, and a figure that made heads turn wherever she went, she had captivated the hearts of countless suitors. She moved through social gatherings like a queen, her laughter musical, her wit sharp, and her presence commanding. Her younger sister, Eleanor, 22, lived in Isabella's shadow. Where Isabella was tall and graceful, Eleanor was average in height with a tendency to stumble over her own feet. Her brown hair was always escaping its pins, her hazel eyes were often hidden behind reading glasses, and her hands were perpetually stained with ink from her constant writing. While Isabella attended every ball and garden party in the county, Eleanor preferred the musty corners of the library or the quiet solitude of her garden. The townspeople whispered that it was unfortunate Eleanor had been born second, for even if she had been first, Isabella's beauty would have always overshadowed her. Mrs. Morrison worried endlessly about Eleanor's prospects, though she tried not to show favoritism. Mr. Morrison, a kind but practical man, had resigned himself to the fact that Isabella would make a brilliant match while Eleanor might need a more modest arrangement. When the announcement came that Alexander Hartford, heir to the Hartford shipping fortune, would be visiting Willowbrook for the summer season, the entire town buzzed with excitement. At 28, Alexander was considered the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. Tall, handsome, with dark hair and intelligent blue eyes, he was not only wealthy but educated, having studied at Oxford and traveled extensively throughout Europe. Every ambitious mother began plotting how to secure his attention for their daughters. Mrs. Morrison was certain this was Isabella's moment. She commissioned new gowns, hired a French hairdresser, and planned an elaborate garden party to which the Hartford family was invited. Isabella prepared herself with the confidence of someone who had never known rejection. She practiced her most enchanting smiles, rehearsed witty conversation topics, and selected her most flattering dress. Eleanor watched these preparations with her usual quiet detachment. She had no illusions about attracting Alexander's attention and felt no jealousy toward her sister. Instead, she buried herself in her latest project, compiling a botanical guide to the wildflowers of the region, complete with detailed illustrations she drew herself. She found beauty in the small, overlooked things, the delicate veining of a leaf, the perfect spiral of a fern's unfurling frond, the quiet resilience of flowers that bloomed in the shadows. On the morning of the garden party, disaster struck. Eleanor's beloved dog, Rusty, an aging terrier she had rescued years ago, fell seriously ill. While the household bustled with final preparations, Eleanor sat in the stable with Rusty's head in her lap, refusing to leave his side even as her mother begged her to at least make an appearance at the party. "I don't care about the party, Mama," Eleanor said quietly, stroking Rusty's fur. "He needs me. I won't abandon him when he's suffering." Mrs. Morrison wrung her hands in frustration but eventually gave up, knowing her younger daughter's stubbornness. She returned to the party, making excuses about Eleanor's absence while Isabella sparkled at the center of attention, with Alexander Hartford at her side. Yet as the afternoon wore on, Alexander seemed distracted. His eyes kept wandering toward the house, and when he learned from a servant about the young woman tending to a sick dog in the stable, something in his expression changed. He excused himself politely from Isabella's conversation about the latest Paris fashions and walked toward the stables, following an instinct he didn't quite understand. Alexander found Eleanor sitting on a worn blanket in the stable, her expensive party dress abandoned for a simple day dress she had clearly thrown on without care. Her hair was coming loose from its arrangement, and there were tear tracks on her dust-smudged face. Rusty lay with his head in her lap, breathing shallowly while she murmured comfort to him and gently stroked his graying muzzle. She looked up in surprise when Alexander's shadow fell across the doorway, and immediately tried to stand, causing Rusty to whimper. She settled back down quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Mr. Hartford, I apologize for my appearance. I didn't expect." "Please, don't apologize," Alexander said, entering the stable and kneeling beside her without hesitation, despite his expensive clothes. I heard your companion wasn't well. May I? Eleanor nodded, surprised by his lack of pretension. Alexander examined Rusty with gentle, knowledgeable hands. I grew up with dogs, he explained, noticing her curious expression. My family breeds hunting hounds. This looks like it might be bloat. Has he eaten anything unusual? They spent the next hour working together to help Rusty. Alexander sent for a veterinarian he knew in the neighboring town and helped Eleanor administer the treatments the vet recommended when he arrived. Through it all, they talked. Unlike the practiced, performative conversations Alexander had endured at countless parties, this dialogue flowed naturally. Eleanor spoke about her botanical studies, her volunteer work teaching reading to the village children, and her dreams of perhaps publishing her wildflower guide someday. Alexander found himself genuinely interested. He shared his own experiences cataloging plant species in Southeast Asia during his travels and his frustration with the superficiality of society life. Everyone always wants to talk about the same things, he admitted. Fashion, gossip, who's courting whom. Sometimes I wonder if anyone thinks about the world beyond ballrooms and garden parties. Eleanor smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. Most people think I'm peculiar for preferring flowers to dancing. Then most people are fools, Alexander replied simply. As evening fell and Rusty's condition stabilized, Alexander realized he had missed the entire garden party. He didn't care. He helped Eleanor settle Rusty in a comfortable bed of fresh hay, and as they walked back to the house, their conversation continued seamlessly. They discussed literature, philosophy, the social reforms needed in industrial cities, and whether the new railway expansion was ultimately good for rural communities. At the house, they found the party had ended. Isabella was barely concealing her irritation, having been abandoned by the guest of honor. Mrs. Morrison looked between Alexander and her disheveled younger daughter with confusion and growing concern. Over the following weeks, Alexander became a regular visitor to the Morrison household, but not for the reasons everyone expected. He would arrive with books for Eleanor, or invite her on walks to identify wildflowers, or engage her in long discussions about everything from politics to poetry. Isabella's attempts to redirect his attention fell flat. Her beauty, which had always been her greatest weapon, seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. The town was scandalized. How could Alexander Hartford prefer plain Eleanor to the incomparable Isabella? Surely he was just being kind to the unfortunate sister before making his true intentions known. Mrs. Morrison didn't know whether to be hopeful or horrified. Isabella, for the first time in her life, experienced rejection, and it stung more than she wanted to admit. But Alexander knew exactly what he was doing. In Eleanor, he had found something infinitely more valuable than physical beauty. He had found an intellectual equal, a kindred spirit who saw the world as he did. When he looked at her, he didn't see someone ordinary. He saw someone extraordinary who had been overlooked by people too shallow to recognize true worth. Her compassion for a sick dog, her passion for knowledge, her genuine kindness, these were the qualities that captivated him completely. 3 months after their first meeting in the stable, Alexander invited Eleanor for a walk in the woods beyond her family's property. It was early autumn, and the forest was beginning its transformation into gold and crimson. Eleanor brought her sketchbook, as always, stopping occasionally to draw a particularly interesting mushroom or the pattern of light filtering through the leaves. They had become so comfortable together that silences between them were never awkward. Alexander had long since stopped questioning his feelings. He had fallen completely in love with Eleanor's mind, her heart, and yes, even her appearance. He found her beautiful in ways Isabella could never be, the way her eyes lit up with enthusiasm when discovering a rare flower, the ink stains on her fingers that spoke of passionate work, the unconscious grace with which she moved when she forgot to be self-conscious. Beside a small waterfall, where wildflowers grew in abundance, Alexander stopped walking. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you about something important." She looked up from the sketch she was making, immediately sensing the serious tone in his voice. "Of course. What is it?" Alexander took her hands in his, sketchbook and all. These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me that genuine connection is possible, that I don't have to spend my life pretending to be interested in meaningless conversation. When I'm with you, I can be completely myself. You challenge me intellectually, inspire me morally, and make me want to be a better man. Eleanor's heart was pounding. She had fallen in love with Alexander but had convinced herself that his attentions were merely friendly, that eventually he would recognize his mistake and turn to Isabella as everyone expected. "I love you, Eleanor Morrison," Alexander continued, his voice steady and sure. "Not despite your differences from your sister, but because of who you are entirely on your own merit. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, you should know that I come with no illusions about myself. I'm not beautiful like Isabella. I'm awkward at social events. I'd rather read than dance, and I'll always have ink-stained fingers. Are you certain you won't regret this?" Alexander smiled, reaching up to gently wipe a tear from her cheek. "I have never been more certain of anything. You are beautiful, Eleanor. Beautiful in ways that matter, in ways that will last long after youth fades. Your compassion, your intelligence, your integrity, these are the things I treasure. And those ink-stained fingers represent a mind engaged with the world, creating something meaningful. How could I possibly regret choosing someone so extraordinary?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered, then stronger, "yes, I will marry you." When they returned to the Morrison house and Alexander formally asked Mr. Morrison for Eleanor's hand, the reaction was explosive. Mrs. Morrison fainted. Isabella locked herself in her room. Mr. Morrison, after recovering from his shock, studied Alexander's face carefully. "Are you certain about this, young man? Isabella is considered the beauty of the county." "I am absolutely certain, sir," Alexander replied firmly. "I'm not choosing Eleanor as a consolation prize. I'm choosing her because she is precisely the woman I want to spend my life with. I love her completely." Mr. Morrison, who had always harbored a special affection for his overlooked younger daughter, felt his eyes grow damp. He shook Alexander's hand. "Then you have my blessing and my respect. It takes a wise man to recognize true value." The engagement announcement sent shockwaves through Willowbrook. How could this have happened? Alexander Hartford, who could have had any woman in the county, had chosen Eleanor Morrison over her beautiful sister. The weeks following the engagement were difficult for the Morrison household. Isabella struggled with feelings she had never experienced before, rejection, jealousy, and a disturbing realization that perhaps beauty alone wasn't enough. She had built her entire identity on being the pretty sister, the one everyone wanted. Now she was forced to confront what she had to offer beyond her appearance. One evening, Eleanor found Isabella crying in the garden. Despite everything, Eleanor felt compassion for her sister. She sat down beside her. "Bella, I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," Isabella said bitterly. "That somehow makes it worse. You didn't even try to win him. He just preferred you." She turned to Eleanor, her beautiful face streaked with tears. "What do you have that I don't? I've always been the pretty one. I've always been the one men wanted." Eleanor considered carefully before responding. "You've been the one men wanted to display on their arm, like a beautiful painting or a prized possession. Alexander wanted someone to talk to think with, to build a life alongside. Those are different things." The words, though gently spoken, hit Isabella like a physical blow because they were true. She had never had a meaningful conversation with any of her suitors. They praised her looks, competed for her attention, but none of them knew her thoughts, her dreams, or even if she had any beyond making a good match. "It's not too late," Eleanor continued. "You're intelligent, Bella. I've seen you solve complex problems. You're talented with music. You have organizational skills that are remarkable. You've just never developed those parts of yourself because you never had to." This conversation marked a turning point for Isabella. She began to engage differently with the world. She volunteered alongside Eleanor at the village school. She discovered a genuine talent for mathematics. When a young architect named Thomas Bennett began courting her and showed interest in her thoughts rather than just her face, she found herself genuinely connecting with someone for the first time. Eleanor and Alexander's wedding was a small, meaningful affair. Instead of an extravagant ball, they held the ceremony in the garden where Alexander had first proposed, surrounded by the wildflowers Eleanor loved. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, and she wore flowers in her hair instead of a veil. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered herself that morning. As Alexander placed the ring on her finger, he whispered, "Thank you for being exactly who you are." Eleanor smiled through happy tears. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Their marriage became the foundation for a remarkable partnership. Alexander supported Eleanor's publication of her botanical guide, which became an unexpected success among both amateur naturalists and serious scholars. Eleanor accompanied Alexander on his business travels, where her sharp mind proved invaluable in negotiations and her botanical knowledge opened doors in scientific communities across Europe. They established a school in Willowbrook for children whose families couldn't afford education, focusing particularly on encouraging girls to pursue learning. Eleanor taught science and literature while Alexander handled mathematics and history when his business allowed. Years later, when people told the story of how Alexander Hartford chose Eleanor Morrison over her beautiful sister, they no longer told it as a scandalous tale. Instead, it became a story about recognizing true worth, about looking beyond surface appearances to see the extraordinary qualities that truly matter. Isabella, now happily married to Thomas and pursuing her own passion for architectural mathematics, would sometimes joke that Eleanor had done her a favor. "Being rejected was the best thing that ever happened to me," she would say. "It forced me to discover who I actually was beyond a pretty face." Eleanor and Alexander's love story reminded everyone in Willowbrook that beauty fades, but kindness, intelligence, passion, and genuine connection last forever. Sometimes the person no one expects is exactly the right choice, if only we're wise enough to see beyond the obvious and recognize true value when it's standing right in front of us, even if it comes with ink-stained fingers and a preference for flowers over ballrooms.